Should I come on? Okay. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here tonight. It is truly a privilege and an honor to have the opportunity to be here before you this evening. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I appreciate Ed's song. It is not an easy song by any means. When I first became a preacher, I usually had individuals that would come up to me and says, "What song would you like for me to lead tonight?" And I usually said 589. That's Al Sager's Selections. And that was that song, Master of the Tempest is Raging. That's 689, your hymns here. And of course, not very many people took me up on that. So I do appreciate you, Ed, not only in your humble approach to trying to fix things, but also the challenging task of leading that song. And I appreciate both things that you did here tonight. I would ask for prayers on my behalf tonight. After tonight, I'll be flying into New Orleans in the morning, and I'll be there for a couple days. And with all the things that has happened the past couple of days, it has, it's got me preoccupied in my mind about what's going on. And to make things worse, when I bent over to kiss Tracy goodbye, she was looking at Instagram, and of course she was looking at a post about a plane crash. And I was like, "Oh, don't you think you should find something else to look at?" But I would ask for prayers on your behalf that we'll have a safe trip there, safe trip back, and a safe trip while I am there. So, and I would greatly appreciate that. And I do, unfortunately, you'll have to hear me twice this week. When I come back on Wednesday, I'll be here Wednesday night, and hopefully you'll enjoy that too, maybe. So, but I hope that, like I said, just keep me in your prayers as we go on this trip here tomorrow. Tonight I want to talk about Silas that we read there, as Les read there in Acts chapter 15, verses 22 through 27. And maybe we say to ourselves, Silas is not a very popular guy to read about because we don't read much about him. Well, maybe it's not necessarily we don't read much about him, we just don't do much talking about him, because there is some passages, not a lot of passages like you read about of Peter or James and John. It's not very detailed like the Apostle Paul and the things that he has done. But there is some things that you can pick up from this particular individual that should be a mindset for you and I when it comes to being a disciple of Christ. And that's what I want to encourage us here tonight. I put this picture up here as kind of a depiction of Paul and Silas being in prison. That's probably one of the most infamous stories that we can recall about Silas in the book of Acts. But there's a variety of other things that is talked about there other than his imprisonment in Philippi. He was with Paul after the breakup between him and Barnabas. He was also an individual that was in Thessalonica. He was also in Berea, and Paul left him there. We just go on and on with some of the examples that we see about Silas, and there's very important things to pick up on these few verses concerning him. So that's what I really want to talk about here tonight. And I hope that will encourage you to think about what is going on and what we need to do when it comes to being a child of God. One of the things that we'll pick up on here about Silas is he was there when things were bad. When division happens within congregations, unfortunately, we feel that there has to be a side to be picked on here. And this is not necessarily that idea here, because you can make a valid argument there in Acts chapter 15 that either one can go with this with either individual. And we all understand that this was an issue about John Mark, whether to take him or not. And if you look at the arguments that we see here with Paul and Barnabas, you can see that there's valid arguments for both sides. Paul wants to take the best with him to go preach this evangelism. And John Mark has left before and don't really need someone kind of leaving here when there's so much great work to do. There was great work in the first trip. There'll be even greater work in the second trip. And we can see that in the epistles itself, that there was greater work to do in that second trip. And so we can understand why Paul doesn't want John Mark to go. But we also can see the mentality of Barnabas here, why he wants to take John Mark. He may have failed before. Let's give him an opportunity to do it again. And maybe he won't leave us this time. There's also the idea that Barnabas does really take up for people. And we should know because he took up for the Apostle Paul. Remember when Paul wanted to join the disciples and the disciples didn't really want to be around him, even though there's been some time that has lapsed? Barnabas was one of those guys that said, no, come and see him. He is a different man now. And you can see the argument for both these individuals. So the thing is, though, when this problem came along where that contention was so sharp, Silas stayed. Sometimes when we say that there's problems in the church or there's difficulties in our congregation, our first avenue or our first thought is to go, to leave, to go find somewhere where there's not all those problems, not all that division, all that drama. But I hate to tell you this, for those that have that kind of mentality, every church you'll go to, as long as Satan has the opportunity to do what he is willing to do, there will always be problems within the church because it is made with imperfect people. And sometimes imperfect people make imperfect decisions. And we must understand that we learn from those imperfect individuals and we learn from those imperfect mistakes. And if it's the first sign that we have to say to ourselves that I have to leave, then we must carry the kind of the weak spirituality that problems is just designed for one particular place, but problems go everywhere. Yesterday I did a basketball game at a school where there's been a big problem within the board. And I remember watching one of those board meetings where a couple of those individuals says, I'm going to quit. Well, I met one of them yesterday. And I said, are you still a board member? He says, yes, I am. And he goes, well, for now. And I said, please don't do that. I said, people put you in that office and they need you. That's why they voted for you. So please be that individual that will be there not only when things are good, but be there when times are tough. Because people really need one another, especially in difficult times. And this is what you see what happens with Silas. Silas, being kind of a chief leader, being a guy that was a little bit intelligent in the scriptures, he was there to help Paul continue on this journey. Don't let him do it by himself. No, I'll go along with you because I want to make sure that you're going to be all right. Don't be there just for your brethren, just when everything's fine. There's a lot of congregations can tell you about good things happening. But when it comes to challenging things happen, that's things that we don't want to talk about because we're afraid that we're going to upset ourselves or embarrass ourselves. Brethren, we all make mistakes. We all have our shortcomings. And what makes us better individuals is when we overcome those obstacles and we work on these things towards our faith. Paul is going to be a better individual because Silas is with him. Paul's going to be a stronger individual in the gospel because Silas is with him. And that comes to my next point. Silas is willing to be there and he is willing to submit to someone. If you look at Acts chapter 15, verse 22, you see that Luke tells us, it says, it seemed good to the apostles and the elders and the whole church to choose men from among them and send to Antioch Paul and Barnabas. They sent Judas called Barsabbas and Silas leading the men among the brethren. And the reason I find this kind of interesting is really Silas is doing grunt work. He's a leader. And leaders are supposed to lead. Leaders don't really need to go out there and do the job. Leaders need to lead. And the other guys, the little guys, they should be doing that kind of grunt work. That's not Silas. Silas is going to go and deal with some very difficult things. And Silas is going to go through suffering. Silas is going to go through some of the things that the Apostle Paul goes through. And Silas also is going to be left behind. And you would say to yourself, a leader doesn't get that kind of treatment. Silas does. I think sometimes, brethren, because we have been around the block for a while, that when we get to a certain point, we say to ourselves, I don't do those things anymore because I'm too old to do them. And I think that's kind of disturbing sometimes when we say to ourselves, I'm too old to do them. I always was encouraged, and she's in your songbooks, Fanny Crosby, and they asked her one time when she was going to stop. And I think that's a mentality a lot should have when she says, I'll stop when I'm cold and dead in the grave. I think that's a great mentality. I have a time to rest, and guess what? It's not now. It's not at 80. It's not at 90. She passed away at 95, and she made that statement in her 90s. When she said to people, and she was blind too, when she said to those people, you know, when I'll retire is when I can't move at all, and that's when I'm dead. And I think that's just a powerful statement about what you and I need to do, whether we're 15 or we're 50, whether we're 35 or we're 85. We still have a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of great things we can do. But the thing is, we get so scared because of our age or our gender or our talents or our abilities or what we could do in a church or what we could do outside of church or what we can't do in a church, and we say to these things that disqualify us from doing anything. I don't know if I told you about this before, but I can remember one time that on one of my appointments as an appointment preacher, a congregation came to me and says, we had sister so-and-so. She hasn't been at church for a while, and we know you had a relationship with her. You're able to talk to her and stuff. Could you go and talk to her about not being here? I said, yeah, sure, no problem. Well, a couple weeks later, they came to me again and said, wait a minute, maybe that's not a good idea for you to do that because that might mess with church autonomy. And I said, okay, that's fine. You know what happened next? Nothing. That tells me two things. One, they haven't been a brother or sister to this individual. And two, they don't know how to approach an individual who has went through this. And that's tragic. Because we're afraid, oh man, what if we upset her? Well, don't you think you're upsetting her for not talking to her? Don't you think she's a little bit bothered that she's been gone for this long period of time and none of her brethren have come to say, what's going on? Brethren, we need to be willing to submit to one another. We need to be willing to say, what can I do for you? You know, one of the things I have tried to fight myself not to say anymore when somebody's going through a trying time is, if you need something, you know where I'll be. You know what that suggests? Don't call me, I'll call you. People never take up on that opportunity for someone that says that statement. However, if you do make the statement to say, what do you need? That opens the door. Keep in mind, brethren, that if we really want the opportunity to obtain the heavenly throne, we need to be willing to submit to one another. It is one of the two greatest commandments of all time. Be willing to submit to one another. While a leader, Silas shows that he is a servant first. He's a leader second. And he is willing to submit and serve. Just keep that in mind when you see Christ in all his power and majesty and teaching, that he was willing to go down on his knees and wash the feet of his own disciples. And that's why Peter makes the statement, you'll never wash my feet, because you're not supposed to be doing that. You are the Son of God. And the response was, if you don't let me do this, you can't have a part of me. Be able to submit. Look, if you will, in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 17, where it tells us that when obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls, as those who will have to give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with groaning, for that would be of no advantage to you. How often leaders are rejected and not follow? How often some people refuse to accept the leadership of a minister or of a church leader or of an elder or of a deacon. Because we believe that we should be our own authority. It's tragic, brethren, right now, that when you look out to our congregations today, the elders and deacons that are scripturally designed for the church are not in the church. And it's not because they don't have individuals qualified. It's because you have individuals says, no, I don't want to do that. That's going to put my family through stuff. That's going to put my friends through stuff. That's going to put my job through stuff. That's going to put me through things that I'm not ready to handle. And we become cowards. We become spiritual cowards when we say to ourselves, we have all these qualifications, and the one qualification we disqualify ourselves from is we have no desire. Brethren, the church won't grow without its leaders. And if we can't be individuals for leaders, let's try to encourage individuals to be leaders. Because here's what's going to happen. You're going to have individuals who have no business being leaders be the voice. And people are going to be willing to listen to them. Because they are wanting somebody. Take the opportunity, brethren, if you have that in your congregation, take the opportunity to build yourself in eldership. Build yourself deacons. If you're not there yet, work that way. It's tragic how we use that excuse for 3 generations now in some congregations to say we don't have qualified elders and deacons. What happened? Another thing too is he's willing to put himself in a difficult situation for another. You ever look at Acts chapter 16 where we talk about that damsel that had a spirit in her where she was able to predict the future? She was a fortune teller kind of. And we see that she had this kind of possession within her. And we see where the Apostle Paul took that out of her. And we see how upset the men became when they lost their way of profit when she is not able to do this anymore. To a point where they decided, as we read there in verse 16, or chapter 16, verse 22, they joined in attacking them. And the magistrates tore the garments off them and gave orders to beat them with rods. And when they had inflicted many blows upon them, they threw them into prison, ordering the jailer to keep them safely. Do you realize it does not say Paul? It's them. We don't have to be English scholars to understand when it talks about them, it's not talking about just Paul. Paul's the one that said everything. Paul's the one that did everything. But he wasn't the only one that got beat. He wasn't the only one that got attacked. He wasn't the only one that got his clothes torn off. He wasn't the one that had blows put upon him. He wasn't the only one that was thrown in prison. Silas was there too. Many times when people go through trouble, we're usually the one going, that guy did it. Don't look at me. It was him. Imagine this, though. Paul's going to go through some stuff, and Silas like, I'm with you. I'm going with you to prison. We're going to sit in the dark together. We're going to sing psalms and hymns together. We're going to do this, and people are going to listen to us. And then when this powerful thing comes along and removes those stocks from their legs and the gates are flung open, you're going to see that they have an opportunity to escape. And they didn't. It should not be a shock to you and I. That's the first thing that a jailer says to them. What must I do to be saved? Because not only you had concern for yourself, you had concern for me. Does anybody know what the punishment is for letting prisoners escape in a Roman government? Execution. And this was God that was keeping them in prison, in the darkest place of prison, sitting possibly with their backs to a wall after they'd been beaten with rods. And they want to make sure that they are all right. And Paul didn't do that alone either. There's a really great reason why Christ, when he sends out the disciples to do this great commission, if you will, he takes them by a pair, to go out and promote the gospel. Because I don't know about you, but there's sometimes when I'm doing certain things and I'm by myself, my thoughts make me go nuts sometimes. I think about things, especially after a basketball game if I officiated. What did I mess up? What did I do wrong? There's going to be times where we are by ourselves and we let our thoughts control us, and sometimes they consume us, and we become fixated on the things that we do in this life, whether it's right or wrong. And think, if you will, about the challenge of an individual that's going out there and promoting the gospel by themselves. That is not easy. Think about how, when it comes to doing anything, things that you enjoy, things that you have to work on, things that you try to involve yourself in, it is so much easier. Even if the individual is just standing there talking to you, it's so much easier when another person's with you. Some of the greatest stories I hear in evangelism, it wasn't when they were by themselves. I'll just say Vernon T. Garden more safely, and maybe you can make the same conclusion. And if you want to know about that story, I'll tell you afterwards. But it's one of the funniest stories I've ever heard, and they did that together. But that's just it. You hear stories like that individuals were willing to go to a place and do something. Whether it's the gospel, or it's helping one another, whatever the case may be, there's an individual that wants to make sure that you don't do this alone. And boy, how great is it in those difficult times, we have them there for us. If you ever want to see what Job's friends got right in the book of Job, is when they sat with him and didn't say a word for 7 days. Look, if you will, in Galatians chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. And it says, "Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of meekness. Consider thyself, lest also thou be tempted. It says, bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." And what it's trying to remind us here is, just like we experienced here tonight, someone that has struggled with things and need the help of the brethren. But really, we need to take that passage beyond that. Think about some of the things that has probably happened in this congregation in the past 6 months. Someone's went through a difficult health issue. Somebody that has lost a loved one. Somebody that just got married. We could go on and on with some of the scenarios of things that has happened to individuals, and ask yourself, what can you do for them? What can you do for the individual who just got married? They're going through it for the first time, and they need all the help they can get. Because really, if you go by statistics, it's not on their side. And now to make the bigger argument, in certain professional fields, it's even more difficult. They need all the help they can get. I don't know what it's like to be a widow or a widower, but boy, I'm going to need somebody if that ever happens to me or my wife. Because I don't know how we're going to handle that. But I need somebody like that on my side, and you need somebody like that on your side. Or somebody who just lost a family member that died unexpectedly. There was a girl down home that had a 15-year-old daughter, and her dad was having a conversation with her, and she passes away. And I finally got to see her this week. This has been a few weeks ago. I haven't had a chance to talk to her. What do you say? How can you relate? But the thing is, when it comes to these difficult situations, it needs to be more than just a few statements. if you need anything, just call me. No, it's got to be better than that. It's got to be stronger than that. It's got to show some kind of compassion and love, because that is said over and over and over again. It just sounds like a broken record. Be the servant instead of being the one just in case you need a servant. Look also too, there was an opportunity to do exciting things. In Acts chapter 17, verse 3 and 4, you see that Paul and Silas was explaining and proving that it was necessary for Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead, and saying, this Jesus whom I proclaim to you is a Christ. And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, and did great many of the devout Greeks, and not a few of the leading women. Just because you hear about the tragedies, don't think for a second there's not great things in evangelism that comes to the triumphs. Last week, I'm on my way here, and I had to correct myself. I had to send a message to my brethren this morning, because I told him, I said, I had to get a resume ready for a congregation that wants me to preach for them. And they thought, and I didn't want them to, after services, Tracy sent me a text and says, they think you're looking for another job. And I was like, no, that's not it. What was really cool is this couple that came from Virginia. They were big Texas fans. And after service, we spent like an hour just talking to them. And she sent me a message, said, hey, we're interested to have you for a gospel meeting. Can you send us references and stuff? And on my way here last week, I'm filling out these, I'm thinking of all these individuals that I could ask to be a reference for me. And I'm thinking about all the places I've went and preached. And if you probably look at the list, you probably think I just made everybody mad that I've ever preached at, because it's a long list. But what was really cool about that was how cool it was to be at all these places and meet all these people and be able to still talk to those people today still. And as I look at my car, and it's got 162,000 miles, I bought that thing new. And I thought how cool and how valuable those miles are, because it brought me to so many cool places to be at with brethren. If you want to look for problems in a church, you want to hear about struggles and things like that, you could find that anywhere. But boy, brethren, I think sometimes we miss out on hearing some of the cool things and the exciting things that happen with the brethren in our churches and some of the good people that we're around. You may find out one individual in the congregation that seems like he or she is the crankiest person on earth, and I don't understand for the life of me why that drowns out the tens upon hundreds of good people that do some really wonderful things. What a blessing that is. It is pretty awesome to be an evangelist in the Church of Christ. It is pretty awesome to be a member in the Church of Christ. It is pretty awesome to be able to hang around brethren even tonight in a building where we all think about the same thing, we're working for the same hope, and we're striving for the same goal. It is pretty awesome to have that opportunity here tonight. And it's sad that some people are going to miss out on it. And it's even more sad that that opportunity to continue that for eternity, they're going to miss out on it too. Just remember the parable of the talents. Good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little, but now you're going to be faithful over a lot of great things. Enter the joy of your master. We miss out on a lot. And finally, Silas was there to do a difficult thing for another. When we think about Philip in Ethiopia, you think about how Philip was doing great things, and he was told to go do something else. And we see an even greater thing happen when he went and met that eunuch. Silas does a similar thing here too. Silas is told to kind of stay back. Paul, who was on his side, Paul, who was his guy, Paul, who was his partner in crime, Paul, who was there when it was good and when it was bad, you see that Paul says, now Timothy, or Silas, stay back here with Timothy. The brothers immediately sent for Paul off on his way to the sea, but Silas and Timothy remained there. Imagine, if you will, and the next time you read 2 Timothy, imagine, if you will, that that's the last letter you will read from your friend. Because according to this history, and according to the things that's going on here at this time, you see that Timothy and Silas will stay there. And they will permit the evangelism there. But isn't it something, and we talked about how great it is that they did these things together. Now, that God that he has always been around, he's not there anymore. And sometimes we feel that way when it comes to a brother and sister in Christ who is no longer with us. How are we going to continue the church? How are we going to continue our work without them? Because it was so fun, it was so easy, and it was so rewarding when we were doing this together. Sometimes we say to ourselves when that happens, I just can't do it anymore. I don't know if that's ever happened to you, but it's happened to me. And the challenges of trying to continue on without somebody is difficult. But the tragedy really is, and the disappointment I would see from this individual who's no longer with us, is how tragic it would be if I just decided to stop preaching. Think about that. What if I just decide, because that person's not with me anymore, I just stop doing everything? I stopped preaching. I stopped traveling. I stayed at home. I let somebody take care of me for once in my evangelism. I'll join a church down home. I'll be an asset to them. Maybe. But think about that. What if we just carry this mentality like we shouldn't do this anymore because that guy's not with us? That's the thing I want us to get out of this. That even though Paul's not there anymore, and you will see that Paul is going to be executed. If you go follow on to stories and history, you see the Apostle Paul, they still continue on without him. And when you look at Timothy, you see that it is an encouragement to keep going. Not to stay, not to just sit back and wait for the coming. No, we got things to do. And it doesn't stop because he stopped. Or he was forced to stop. I remember one young man, that's the end of my lesson here. So I remember one young man down home. If you continue to read there in Acts chapter 17, if I'm not mistaken, some people accused them of turning the world upside down. And this young man down in Marietta, Reno says, how cool would it be if we done that in Marietta, Ohio? How cool would that be if we did that in Wellsburg, West Virginia? How cool would it be to do that in Washington, Pennsylvania, or Wheeling, West Virginia, or St. Clairsville, Ohio? How crazy would it be that we could turn that place upside down? It's not impossible. I think sometimes we say to ourselves it's impossible because we put all this worldly human factors into it. But remember what our Lord said, this is to man it seems impossible, but God, all things are possible. Even right now, we have something that's possible here tonight. The next steps of salvation. The repentance of sin. The power of prayer. These things are available for us tonight. The next step. It's not the last step. It's not, maybe for some of us, it's not the first step, but it is a step. And sometimes we're not willing to take that step because we are fearful that someone is going to think of something. Once again, to man it's impossible, but with God all things are possible. And it is possible for you tonight. If you need to respond to anything involving this invitation, the opportunity to do it is right here, right now. And if you need to respond, let's do so while we stand, while we sing.